Hey everyone, so this is the next video in Extra Deck Evolutions. So the previous video we talked about fusion monsters, and now we're going to talk about synchro monsters. And similarly, we're going to talk about my initial impressions of synchro monsters, along with how I thought they shaped the game back then, and how they basically turned Yu-Gi-Oh! Into the game it is in the modern day. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So, my first impression of Synchro Monsters was back in 2008. Between the years 2008 and 2011 was when Synchro Monsters were at their peak. That's really the time when they were at their most dominant and most popular. And so when I saw these cards, I was initially shocked, but I was intrigued at the same time. I began seeing them in my locals, and I wondered, were these Yu-Gi-Oh cards? The new white borders kind of took me by surprise, and I didn't know what to make of them. They were very different, but they were intriguing at the same time. And ironically, the first Synchro monster I saw was a Japanese print of Stardust Dragon. And upon seeing that card, I instantly fell in love with the card. I just loved the look of it, I loved the design of it, I loved the artwork about it. It was infinitely cool because it was in Japanese, and the Japanese lettering made it look infinitely more cool in my eyes. So, and then I wondered, how do you summon this new extra deck mechanic? How do you summon this new synchro monster? And in trying to figure it out, I tried to buy a new copy of Stardust Dragon, and I didn't see much success because I found out how expensive Stardust Dragon was. And being that I didn't have as much money back then as I do today, I had to settle for a more cheaper alternative, and basically had to find the way that most people were getting a hold of these synchro monsters in general, and that's how I mainly got a hold of these synchro monsters. So the main way I did that was by purchasing the starter deck Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and within this starter deck you got synchros, prominent synchros such as Junk Warrior, Gaia the Force of Earth, and Colossal Fighter. So Junk Warrior was one of the poster childs. I guess it was the poster child in this new starter deck that basically introduced synchro monsters. And now that we got this new starter deck, it didn't take too long for us to get a main core set, and that core set was the Duelist Genesis. And ironically enough, Stardust Dragon came out in that new main core set, Duelist Genesis, and Synchros really cemented their stay in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta primarily through Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon really did that for them because it provided a mainstream way to negate destruction effects. And we hadn't really seen that in previous years. We hadn't really had a very mainstream way to negate destruction effects like Stardust Dragon did. So Stardust Dragon incorporated itself as a synchro monster, and it was easy to summon out because synchro monsters were getting a ton of support, and it was basically the first really strong synchro monster to make its mark in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta and implement this whole new way on how to negate destruction effects. And so that was basically how synchros came to be. And on top of that, synchros provided a whole new way to play. So if you had been playing at the time up to that point, you primarily saw fusion monsters in the extra deck. That's pretty much what you were used to in the extra deck. When you thought of the extra deck, you only thought of fusion monsters. But now that synchro monsters were out, synchro monsters were basically an alternative to fusions. Because fusions, you needed a polymerization, and for synchros, you didn't need a polymerization in that effect. So, the main way you summon out synchro monsters was by using this new subtype of monster called a tuner monster. And these tuner monsters were required to make synchro monsters. And the way you would synchro summon, typically, you would have one tuner monster out on the field, and you'd have however many necessary non-tuner monsters out on the field. And you would typically summon by using one tuner monster. And basically, when you had the one tuner monster and however many necessary non-tuner monsters, you had to make sure that the combined levels of those monsters would total the levels of the desired synchro monster you were trying to summon out at the time. And this was revolutionary at the time, since Yu-Gi-Oh's speed enabled greater amounts of special summoning, which in turn you could pump out more tuner monsters and use them with your other smaller monsters that really couldn't do too much on their own. But now you could make more use of them with this tuner monster, because you figured out, hey, all these monsters together with this tuner monster, their levels pretty much total to be this one really strong synchro monster in my extra deck that I can now use to basically KO my opponent, or basically really turn the tides of this game around. And that's really how synchro monsters were changing the overall meta in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that they were providing this new kind of revolutionary way to use your smaller monsters that didn't have much use in previous years. So you could say this was a new, faster way to play the game. So the addition of tuner monsters really did speed up the game, because tuner monsters, yeah, you needed them for synchro summoning, but you could also pull off really neat, almost like crafty tricks with tuner monsters, because they could in turn be revived from the graveyard, and you instantly would pretty much get access to another synchro monster that you could summon based off of that tuner monster. And because you could synchro summon more, you would be able to trigger more effects from that new synchro monster you just summoned onto the field. So the rule of thumb was, if you could synchro summon more often, you would be able to take advantage of more of these effects that these synchro monsters had, which in turn could kick off your combos as an effect because of it. And so tuners that really helped perpetuate this cycle was a card mainly known as Plague Spreader Zombie, which it could revive itself from the grave. That's what its effect was. You could put a card from your hand back to the top of your deck, and boom, you could special summon Plague Spreader from your graveyard. As simple as that. So it was easier to get out these synchro monsters, and because you could more easily get out synchro monsters, you were basically able to have this really high attack point monster out on the field, which you would put more pressure on your opponent and enabled you to KO your opponent more readily. And I guess you could say this was the start of the modern day OTK combo, was because of synchro monsters. And this really made Yu-Gi-Oh! More aggressive, and made synchro monsters more aggressive, because they were these high attack monsters that could easily get onto the field and just put pressure on your opponent. And in turn, we saw Yu-Gi-Oh! Put more of an importance on combo starters, and we saw more importance being placed on spells in general because of it. And because synchro monsters were so easy to summon now, they basically went from being the card you were trying to use to the card you wanted and you needed to use in order to survive against your opponent, or find any basic meta success in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Landscape at that point. And a few instances of competitively viable synchro monsters were things like Braionic, Trishula, Dark Strike Fighter, and Ally of Justice Catastor. And these cards really did provide a very competitive advantage, because they were easy to summon, but they also carried a lot of very effective effects that basically allowed you to destroy cards, negate cards, balance things, and banish cards that your opponent may have on the field. And you had access to all these effects more readily now more than ever, because you could summon these synchros out very easily. So now, using tuners with non-tuner monsters provided the perfect mix of speed and strategy. The process of summoning monsters and tuner monsters to obtain the desired level of the synchro monster you wanted to summon out at the time was pretty much the most entertaining aspect, in my opinion. So this was almost like a puzzle-solving process that required a very specific amount of difficulty along with strategy. And it was because of this basic puzzle-solving process that it made synchro summons not too easy to summon. They were still easy enough to summon out, but it wasn't outright unfair for your opponent. So what I'm saying is, it didn't perpetuate spamming to where it was unfair for your opponent, to where they just couldn't keep up with you. It was a well-rounded mechanic that, like I said before, it was the perfect mix between speed and strategy, at least in my opinion. But the thing that really did it for me in terms of the synchro mechanic is you could even do something like play instant fusion, and you could get a level 5 or below fusion monster from your extra deck, summon it onto the field, then you can get your tuner monster, and then you could use that tuner monster for a synchro summon with the fusion monster. And that's what really did it for me. it's the thing that Synchro monsters actually did in the long haul. Synchro monsters didn't hinder previous extra deck mechanics. They didn't hinder fusion, the fusion extra deck mechanic. They expounded upon it. They built upon it to where you could use fusion monsters to synchro summon in turn and get a whole new way, a whole new level of strategy that you can use in the game. And so it was basically this mix of mixing in the old with the new that made Yu-Gi-Oh! All the more enjoyable for me, and it really did give that sensation that I was playing in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Golden years. It was really that best of both worlds thing that really did it for me in terms of Synchro and in terms of Synchros, and basically made me love Synchros for eternity and even up to this day. And that brings me to my next point, Synchro's longevity. So part of the reason why I feel Synchros have persisted as long as they have is because they, from a very early standpoint in the game, they took advantage of special summoning very effectively. Tuner monsters were meant to be special summoned out very easily. Not to the point where they're unfair, but from a very balanced standpoint in my opinion. And that's very true in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Because look at modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays. You summon out a lot of very normal effect monsters nowadays, and if you manage to summon out a tuner monster, well, now you can basically tailor the levels of the other monsters you have on the field and say, hey, now I have this tuner monster on my side of the field and I can synchro summon. I can use the other smaller monsters I have on the field to make this big monster to kick off my other effects. And that's part of the reason why I feel synchros like Beel's Psyframe Lord Omega and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, Borreload Savage Dragon, all those monsters, I feel that's part of the reason why they're used today, is because they're very solid monsters in their own right, and they're very easy to summon out. Like Beel's the Diabolical Dragon and Psyframe Lord Omega, and even, yeah, heck, all of these cards, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, Borreload Savage Dragon, they're all level 8 synchros. They're very easy to summon out. And it's not too much to ask of these modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks to put tuner monsters into the deck, because now you can search those tuner monsters out, and since they've basically been they've been easy to summon out to begin with, now that you're able to search out these tuner monsters from your deck, you can easily get them out onto the field and basically tinker with the levels of your monsters on the field and get the desired synchro monster that you want from your extra deck. So the modern day relevance of synchro monsters is really a testament to their design, and is part of the reason why I like them so much. They've really withstood the test of time, and they've really incorporated themselves with the special summon heavy mechanic of modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! So that's pretty much the reason why I like synchro monsters. That's my take on the synchro mechanic in general. I mean, I really enjoyed making this video. It was pretty much a walk down memory lane, and it really got me to think about the parts of the synchro summoning mechanic that I really did enjoy even back in the day, and nowadays that I currently use them. So yeah, with that pretty much wraps up the video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you would like to support content like this, you can support me on Patreon. Of course, you don't have to. It's solely if you want to, but I really appreciate any support that you give me in general, whether if it's just watching my videos, sitting there and liking my videos, not even just hitting the like button, but just simply enjoying them. I really appreciate any support that you all give me. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next video. Alright, bye.